My name is Danae Bravo, and I did my research project on the species richness in the San Mateo County coastline beaches. So, for some background, species richness is the amount of species present in a unit area, and species richness can help determine the biodiversity and overall health of an ecosystem. Bay Area is a hotspot of biodiversity, which is why I wanted to study specifically the Bay Area beaches. Um, the Bay Area is home to a variety of plant, birds, and bugs. Um, Certain plants like kelp are a source of food to many species like birds and invertebrates. And these plants are often used as habitat for birds and invertebrates as well. Human impacts very often pose a threat to these species and their habitats, and this can happen from dogs being off leash or just from a high level of human visitors. Um, Therefore, it is important to study the species richness in these areas because um, a lack of species richness can signify that the ecosystem is not in a healthy state. So, for my research question and hypotheses, I decided that my first research question was going to be is there a significant difference between the amount of species richness at 3 different beaches along the San Mateo County coastline? And the null hypothesis for this question was that there is no difference between the amount of species richness at 3 different beach sites. The alternate hypothesis was that there is a difference between the amount of species richness at 3 different beach sites. The research question was, is there a relationship between the number of species present and the amount of trash found at the 3 different beach sites? Kind of to test more for the human impact on the species richness at the beaches. So my null hypothesis was that there is no relationship between the number of species present and the amount of trash at the 3 different beaches. And my alternate hypothesis was that there is a relationship between the amount of species present and the amount of trash found at the 3 different beach sites. So, for my methods of my data collection, I used a website called californiabeaches.com to determine what beaches were actually in the San Mateo County coastline. So, I tried to include a screenshot of the map that I used for a reference as a rough estimate of where the San Mateo County coastline is. From that map, I picked out the beaches that had dunes in them, since this was my ecosystem or area of study. Since in the sand I can't count for plant species, I decided to count specifically in the dunes area of the beaches so that there would be something to count. So I looked through the photos and determined that there was 23 beaches that had dunes in them, and I randomly selected 3 beaches. I numbered the beaches 1 through 23 and randomly selected 3. I also randomly selected 2 dates and times to go take data. I created 15 6-foot radius plots and randomized the direction with a pencil and randomized how many steps I was going to take in that direction using a coin. I flipped a coin. Heads was 75 steps and tails was 100 steps. The 3 beach sites that I ended up gathering my data from were San Gregorio State Beach, Venice Beach in Half Moon Bay, and Muscle Rock State Beach. As you can see by the pictures, they all have some type of dune area to take data from, which is mainly where I collected my samples of plant species richness. For my data analysis, for my first research question, I began by determining what I was looking for. So I was looking for the difference between the means of 3 groups. So I decided to first find the distribution of the data, which I did by doing descriptive statistics on Excel. And this gave me the kurtosis and the skewness, which led me to believe that the data was normally distributed. And I then performed an ANOVA test using the Excel data analysis tool pack to determine if there was a significant difference between the species richness at the beaches. For my second research question, I began by determining if the data was normally distributed, which I did by doing a regression test on Excel with the residuals, and then I found the descriptive statistics of the residuals and found the skew and kurtosis of those, and I determined that my data was not normally distributed. So I decided to perform a Spearman-Ranks correlation test. So my results for the first research question, again, as I stated, the kurtosis was between -1 and 1. Therefore, the data was normally distributed. The ANOVA test result was 0.356, which determined that the result did not have a significant difference, and all of these values are highlighted on this table. You can see the kurtosis levels were below 1 to -1, or in the range of 1 to -1, sorry. And same with the skewness. To support the results that from the first research question, as well as from the previous ANOVA test, we can see that this bar graph with error bars demonstrates that the beaches were similar in their species count and that there is really no significant difference between the amount of species counted at each beach site. So the results for my second research question are demonstrated in this graph. This is a scatter plot. So what I did was I input the original values of the trash counted and the species counted into the Spearman-Rank calculator, and it determined for me what the RS value and the p-value were. So the RS value determines the correlation that there is, if any, and the p-value determines how strong that relationship is. So the RS value that I got was -0.322, which demonstrates that there's a slight declining trend. And that's also demonstrated by the graph that it's a very, very weak declining trend because the points are very far apart from one another. Or they vary in where they are in the graph, but they're kind of in a declining trend. The p-value was 0.030, and the p-value helps us determine how strong the correlation is, so this determined that the correlation was weak. So given the results and the graphs and the data that we analyzed, for research question 1, I am going to accept the null hypothesis, so that means that there was no significant difference between the amount of species at each of the 3 beach sites. And for research question 2, I'm also going to accept the null hypothesis because there was not a significant there was not a significant relationship between the amount of trash and the amount of plant species at each beach site. So these results that I got are important because they can help determine the health of the ecosystems in the San Mateo County beaches. I believe that given that there is not really a significant difference between the species richness at each beach site, nor between the trash and the amount of species richness found, there is really no impact directly from the trash on the amount of species richness, and it seems that the species richness in the 3 beaches is in a similar state, given that there's not a significant difference between the 3 beach sites. So my results demonstrate that there are not significant declines in the species at the beach sites. I also did want to mention that I did see like a park ranger cleaning one of the beaches around San Gregorio State Beach while I was taking data from there. And I'm not sure if that's something that regularly happens, but that might have had an impact on the amount of trash that I found at the beach sites if that is something that regularly happens. I think taking more data from different sites would have given me better results, like analyzing the whole San Mateo County coastline. But that's obviously like a lot more time consuming. And yeah, I think the plot sizes and the amount of steps that I took were really good because I think I got a really good gauge of 3 beaches at least. Most of the dune area, especially around the entrance and like walkways of the beaches, I think it did a really good representation of that area of the beach. I think if I could do a future study or recommend a future study for this research question, it would be more on like bird species or other type of species that weren't just plant species, but I personally found that it would be too difficult to take data on bird species. So, and I wasn't really sure on how to do that. So I think that that would be helpful rather than only doing plant species to also do animal species that are present in the beach.